Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker. Are you someone who has been in a physically abusive relationship, emotionally abusive relationship, or even a sexually abusive relationship? And you find yourself in that place where you are hurting, you are wounded, you're feeling isolated, you don't think that there is a light or even a better life for you on the other side waiting for you. Well, our next guest, who is a regular featured guest appearing here on Revealing the Truth on the third Monday of every month at 11 o'clock, is my safe person and dear friend, Dr. Ramona Probasco, author of Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, From Victim to Survivor to Overcomer. Dr. Ramona holds a doctorate in psychology and has conducted extensive research in the area of domestic violence. She's a marriage and family therapist, a certified domestic violence counselor, and a nationally certified counselor. She's been in private practice for over 20 years. She's an expert and sought-after speaker on domestic violence and how to authentically heal well from the trauma it causes. As a personal overcomer of domestic violence, she offers guidance and insight to others based on both her clinical experience and her own experience of moving from victim to survivor to overcomer. She's the mother of 3 incredible adult children and 2 wonderful adult children through remarriage, and she now thoroughly enjoys being the wife of a husband who absolutely adores her. You can find her online at www.healingwellandlivingfree.com. Here to join us in this regular hour about abuse recovery is Dr. Ramona Probasco, author of Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, From Victim to Survivor to Overcomer. Dr. Ramona, welcome to and welcome back to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, Rabbi Walker. It's such a pleasure. I look forward to our chats every month. When I see your name pop up on my calendar, I'm like, yay, I get to have my Monday morning chat with you. So thank you for having me on.
Well, thank you. And I too look forward to it because I relate to you at multiple levels. One of them is my high regard for you clinically as one who we can talk about some of the issues that you and I have faced, and we don't have to make it about a patient or a client or someone we counsel. We can draw on personal experience and the experience of others and find the path to moving and navigating through this that impacts so many people. And in the past, we talked about that, I believe statistically, you said 1 in every 4 women worldwide, or is that 1 in every 4 women in America?
It's 1 in every 4 women and 1 in every 7 men experience some form of severe physical violence in the U.S., and then it's 1 in 3 women globally. So it happens to both men and women. It's not a gender issue.
Right.
It's a victimization issue.
And when you add to it from the physical abuse to the betrayal that goes along with it, to the prisoner kind of mentality that you become imprisoned in this abuse, it's incredibly hard to navigate. And here we are coming into what we call the holiday season. Mm-hmm. And in this holiday season, it brings on a whole new set of dynamics and a whole new sets of issues for those that are currently in an abusive relationship, those who have recently come out of an abusive relationship, and those who are still recovering and trying to rebuild a life. So there are stages within stages, and I wanted to talk with you today about this whole process and how to help people navigate through something that should be rejoicing, thanksgiving, lifting up the creation and the birth of our Messiah, the one who set us free, and yet sometimes we find us in more of an isolated than associated kind of position, and we begin this pre-holiday dread that is something that I think is real. It's palpable, and people struggle with it. Maybe they're not talking about it. maybe they're not going to counseling about it, but I know that there are plenty of people that either have an empty seat at the table or they just have an empty table, and they're
Right.
wondering, what do I do with this time, and how or will I ever get out of this?
Right. Well, you captured it incredibly well. And that is the plight for many people. And the holidays, in my opinion, what I believe often happens is that the holidays highlight what is already taking place in a person's life. And so depending on, like you said, where you are in, if you're still currently in an abusive situation, that added stress of the holidays will exacerbate what's already there. We often see that there's abusive incidents, whether they're verbal, physical, however they take place, they rise. Statistically, there's more that takes place around the holidays because of the sheer stress and for various reasons. And then, of course, if you've recently left an abusive relationship, you're going to be in the throes of the grief. So that, again, is going to be exacerbated. And even if time has passed, like you just mentioned, and perhaps it's been months or years, the holidays, again, can highlight those empty places that we still feel inside. So, the question that you sent me prior to the show is, what do we do? What do we do in response to this? And I wish that there was some sort of, magic wand I could just wave over everyone that is experiencing this right now, but there's no such thing. And I myself remember how difficult holidays were, regardless if I was still married to Ben or even, months and years afterwards. I was talking to my sweetie. I'm remarried, of course, as you've mentioned, to a wonderful, wonderful man. And we were chatting about this before the show this morning, and talking about just how difficult it was for both of us during the holiday time, and not even just during the holiday time, but just in general. And I recall, Eric, there was a chair, a particular chair that my children referred to as the mama bear chair. It was just this old dilapidated brown chair that I held on forever. And I would sit in that chair. I don't have that chair. I've given it away now, but I would sit in that chair sometimes for hours, just weeping and talking out loud to God and just saying, God, when is this grief going to lift? So I think part of it is allowing ourselves, being tender with ourselves, allowing ourselves to feel whatever we're feeling, express whatever is pent up inside. I used to refer to it as I have tears behind my eyes. The tears that no one sees, I think, can be the most painful ones of all. So letting them out. At the same time, there also it's important to recognize that part of it involves us also choosing to step out. And again, I don't say this from some lofty tower. I remember dreading going to certain events around the holidays, and even not around the holidays, just being social because I was hurting so deeply inside.
Right.
But I can recall on multiple occasions telling myself, by an act of my will, that's how I talk to myself, by an act of my will, I'm going to choose to step into this festive occasion or whatever it was, gathering with friends or family or whatever. And I'm going to allow myself to get from it whatever I can. I didn't set some lofty goal that, it was going to change my world, but I said to myself, I'm going to allow myself to enjoy it on whatever level I can. So I tried to set realistic expectations while at the same time, in a sense, for me personally, sort of pushing myself to do things that weren't comfortable.
When you face that kind of realization that in your case, in my case, nobody knew what was really going on behind the scenes. It was a secret. It was well hidden. There were certainly Academy Award-winning performances in public. Mm-hmm. The lead actor, the Oscar goes to the lead actor in the role of rabbi over a congregation of 750 families. for best performance, in a leading role.
Yes.
And then when it finally came crashing down because of betrayal and the whole framework being gone, and at 62 years old, seeing a life that you thought was going to be your life forever stripped away, it shatters a lot of paradigms, but it does not change other people.
Right.
They pick a side, and if they pick based on the party line, most often they pick the wrong side because they just don't know. And in my particular case, the Lord told me, don't say anything.
Right.
I'll take care of this vindication over time. I'll put you where I want you to be. I will restore you as far as ministry and as far as being an impact in the kingdom. I'll take care of that for you. But I don't recall even today saying, what about the man behind the person? What about the woman behind Dr. Ramona Probasco? Okay. Here you have this circle of people that still relate to you, and they don't recognize you as a person because they recognize you as a title or an entity, or there's
there's an association with the relationship and the partner, and often there is that dual presentation where the way you present as a couple or even individually publicly is very, very different than the private world. And so when, like you said, the house of cards comes crashing down and what is comes into the public light, people can really struggle and frankly, in many cases, not even believe when you begin to share your story that this is how it was. So, I can completely relate with that, and because I kept it pretty much under wraps, with the exception I talked with my best friend quite a bit, but my family, we were thousands of miles away, and so they didn't know really how ugly things had gotten. And even early after Ben and I separated, I can remember sitting at the holiday table at my folks' house, and my dad, who really struggled with accepting the divorce, still prayed for Ben. And not that I don't want to pray for Ben, but I was still so raw. And family, sometimes friends, they just don't get it. And sometimes they're well-meaning, sometimes they're not.
Right.
But it adds, it's fuel to the fire. So there's no easy answer for it, but what you said, Rabbi, about our vindication, I white-knuckled that Bible verse for years, and matter of fact, I just read it the other day in Psalms, and I was like, Lord, thank you. I'm beginning to see his vindication coming through. And then there's areas where the fingerprints of abuse on our lives is still quite apparent, and that's really hard to look at. But I hold on to that truth that the vindication, and all of it may not take place on this side of eternity either, which is sometimes tough to swallow, but we will be vindicated. That we know.
Yes, we do. And, I think I shared with you that in the period after 5.5 years ago, I went on a deep search through Scripture to try to understand God's plan of vindication as to why he wanted me to not speak out, not to say anything, not to engage, but to be silent on the issue, which was very confusing to a lot of people. But now that we're out of what I would consider I had a legally binding agreement that expired in June about me keeping quiet about the terms of the separation. I'm now able to speak freely. I don't ever talk about the terms of the separation or their admission of wrongdoing on their part in how I was treated, but yet I did see that there was in writing that this was to be a opportunity for God to vindicate, for God to restore, and I find great comfort in seeing what God has done, the establishment of this network, the establishment of our program, the establishment of our ministry, and this heart of flame, which is an igniting of something new and a new passion. But then I also begin to think about how many people that don't have that, and how many people have been or are in an abusive relationship or have come out of an abusive relationship, and they lost to the same degree that you and I lost everything that we knew and everything that we believed in, and how we based our future decisions upon was really the rug pulled out from under us. And there's still this, every now and then, I'm the Nadia Comaneci, you know, doing the flips in the air, just wondering, how do I stick this landing, and do I have to keep on doing this, and for how long, and what is the restoration process? And I'm sure that Moses, in his 40 years in Midian, wondered the same thing. I'm sure that Joseph, although it's not recorded, the 25 years between the dream and the dream coming true, or the years of Daniel, or the years of the questioning, and we see this playing out in Elijah, who we might consider to be somebody who was abused, or David. We might consider him to be somebody who was abused by King Saul, persecuted for something. We look at Paul, who was persecuted for his faith. And so we're in very good company, but they're not at home with us. They're not at the Thanksgiving table. And you'd like to set a place for them and have a conversation with them, but then all of a sudden somebody looks in the window, and that's when they start calling and asking somebody to come pick you up because you're sitting at this large dining table having these conversations.
Oh, gosh. Yes, yes. Well, you know, there's a verse that really has given me tremendous comfort that speaks to what you're talking about right now. It's out of Psalm, the book of Psalms in chapter 84, where it talks about, when I want to quote it and I want to break it down quickly. When I go through the valley of weeping, sometimes it's referred to as the valley of Baca, it will become a place of refreshing springs and autumn rains. What the Lord taught me in that verse is that it's not if we go through the valley of weeping, it's when. When the pronoun is I, and that's really what you've been emphasizing, is the loneliness of this grief walk, that it often you feel or are isolated, rejected, and misunderstood by people. So when I go through, the preposition is through, we're not intended to camp out in the valley of weeping. The intention, the plan of God is for us to walk through. Notice his pace. His pace is not a run. How many of us, myself included, wanted to run through that time of grieving, which took me several years, you know, and still now certain tears will rise to the surface, you know, when I think about certain things, or you know, think about my children, what they went through. So when I walk through the valley's dark, you know, it's shadowy, it's not comfortable. But here's the good part. It being whatever you are weeping over will become, that tells me it's a promise, it will become, and it's also a process, it will become. A place of refreshing springs and autumn rain. So whatever your it is, your pain, that very thing is what God intends as we walk through this valley, not camp out. Those very areas of pain will become areas of blessing, not only in my life, but in the lives of other people. That verse alone has helped me so much to remind me when I've been going through, or when I was going through, and now when it still rears its head occasionally, what you're describing, this pain, this loss, I remind myself, it's becoming. I'm becoming. My situation is becoming. It's his promise. So again, but when we're in it, it's tough. It's called the valley of weeping. It's not the valley of I'm going to kick my heels together and this is a rah-rah fun time. It's painful. And I think to be able to have conversations like this, finding your safe person, whether it be a counselor, a neighbor, whoever it is, someone that you can trust with your heart, to be able to come alongside you and where you can feel safe to share these things when you need to.
Well,
because it's a walk, it takes time.
It does. And I think that's part of the challenge is our concept of how long it should take and God's concept of how long it should take are radically different. And the bounce back and the recovery process and what the new normal is supposed to look like, because it really is starting from a blank sheet of paper. And although you have some idea of what you think you would like, you find yourself reluctant to pursue that, or you just don't know how because you've never done it before, and you reach an age where you don't even know how.
Right.
So if you don't know how to start, how do you start? And where do you begin? And when you obtain a position, and there are corporate executives, there are congregational leaders, there are heads of ministries, heads of counseling organizations that have gone through that, and I personally have gone through it, you've gone through it, and you begin to realize that this is not other people don't play the actors in your play. You are the lead in the play. You're the director, you're the casting director, you're the executive producer, you're the script writer, and this is your play and your story. And it's almost like writer's block is set in because you write a draft and you wad it up, and there's a big pile in the corner of all the drafts, and you've now been years of drafting how you're going to come out of this, but you realize that there's certain constraints that are either occupational because of visibility and public eye, or because of perceptions, or any number of some real, some perceived, and some completely of the enemy. So it becomes a challenge. We're talking with Dr. Ramona Probasco, author of Healing Well and Living Free from an Abusive Relationship, from Victim to Survivor to Overcomer. What you are experiencing in this dialogue are real. The names have been changed to protect others who have been involved, but the two people who are talking are two people who have gone through this and have come out the other side. Dr. Ramona is the living proof that you can move from victim to survivor to overcomer. She has found a wonderful, loving husband who I just had the pleasure of meeting and honoring him for how he has sown so much into her life. And he too shared that he had the same experience on his end and how much his partner, Dr. Ramona, has sowed into his life. So there is great hope, and the process is different for each one of us, but we find comfort in the words that it is a season. Seasons last for different periods of time, but the hope is that we need to have a ready answer for the hope that we have, and that is our faith in Jesus, and that He's coming back, and that truly that as much as I hate to stand against the great, wonderful message, we are living our worst life now. We are not living our best life now. Our best life is the life to come. And so for many of us who have faith in Jesus, this is the worst it's ever going to get. This is the only hell we're ever going to know. And so if we are in that season, we need to rejoice that on the other side of this is our best life, and something that God promises will be much better. Not that we should do anything to hasten that time to come, or to make it that we move closer to that, but that as we navigate the healing process, that there are tools that we have that Dr. Ramona gives us in her book and in our conversations that are going to guide us through this troubled waters and come out the other side healed and whole, but yet still healing and not putting a false expectation on ourselves that the healed will ever really come, but the healing will.
That's exactly right. It's an ongoing. That's why I purposely wrote ing, healing.
And when we come back, we're going to continue our conversation with Dr. Ramona Probasco, author of Healing Well and Living Free from. Told you you were Irish, you were French, you were Jewish. Wonder who's interested in that information. It's not like you've sent it off to a database with millions of other people and they can steal your identity. And who would really be interested in that information other than you? Well, maybe your friends and family, but there's one, yes, one who is so interested in your DNA that it would be something that would make you afraid. And that is Satan himself. Why would Satan be interested in your DNA? Because there is a Y chromosome marker that determines whether or not you are in the line of Aaron. That's right, the biblical line of Aaron the priest. That's because if the priesthood comes back and the high priest takes his role as the head of the Sanhedrin, they will be the ones to call for the return of Jesus. Well, what can they do with your DNA? Well, there are 40-plus countries weaponizing DNA today. And imagine if Satan could weaponize your DNA and use that Y chromosome marker to take out the line of the high priest, then Jesus doesn't come back. That is the plot behind the best-selling book, The Codus, now out in second edition on Kindle, $2.99, also available in paperback. This is a biblical thriller beyond comparison that's going to take you on an incredible journey to understand what they could do with your DNA. I also want to encourage you to visit our website, ignitingnation.com, and click on special offers. There you're going to find the yellow cover of this book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. We're going to take you on a journey in the Garden of Eden to the seed, the ground, all the way out to the fruit that reveals things of the natural that God is trying to reveal supernatural truths. Contained within these pages are 7 laws and 7 lessons within each law. They're going to take you on an incredible journey of understanding about the life you live and the fruit you bear. I want to encourage you to click on that yellow cover. We're going to ask for your email. Now, we won't send you spam because spam is not kosher, but we will send you the first chapter of this book. I want to encourage you to get 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. You can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes & Noble. You can get it Books A Million, wherever great Christian books are sold. Take this journey with me to the Tree of Life in the Garden of Eden and to the Tree of Life we see again at the River of Life. Get your copy today. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and as we do on the 3rd Wednesday of every month at this hour, we talk with Dr. Ramona Probasco, who is
Thank you, Rabbi Walker. Pleasure to be here.
You made a comment that you wanted to circle back on something that I had said during our conversation in regards to my processing, and you thought it might be helpful for our audience to hear that.
Yes, when you shared about how you felt the Lord directing you to not defend yourself and speak out and, in a sense, share your story and hold your tongue. And, that's not, of course, that's something the Lord told you to do. That doesn't necessarily mean that other people that are listening right now, that's how he's directing them. But the fact that you obeyed God and you trusted him and you didn't speak out, to me, is a type of worship. I believe there's many ways we worship God. that fall way outside the box of going to church on a Sunday morning, maybe clapping our hands, maybe raising our hands, singing, however you worship. And those are all wonderful. But I believe there are ways that we can worship God, like what you did, Eric, by choosing to obey him and allow him to defend you. And that to me reflects that the scripture that you and I were chatting about, where it talks about that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for the pulling down of strongholds. When you're in an abusive relationship, it is a type of stronghold, definitely. At the root of it, it's demonic. It's not God's intention. Relationships are supposed to be safe. So the fact that you entrusted God like that, to me, is such a beautiful expression of worship. It's like in Ephesians where it says, when you've done everything to stand, stand. What God has been teaching me, that second stand is the toughest one. Mm-hmm. That is a tough stand. That's when you have to lean into the Lord. And that doesn't mean necessarily you're going to be like, oh, praise the Lord, Often in that second stand, there's tears, there's confusion, there's perhaps anger with God. And one of the things I think is very important is for us to be real with God. I can imagine that when you were going through that time and you weren't defending yourself, I'm sure you were having conversations with the Lord. You weren't just clicking your heels together. That was painful.
At this time of year, we tend to look around at the idyllic picture of healthy, healed, whole, close relationships. I come from a very almost an exploded family. None of my relatives live near each other. No parents live near their children. No children, no cousins live anywhere near each other. There are no family gatherings. There are no family events. There are no reunions. There's no connection whatsoever, and it's been like that for over 40 years. A lot of times family is the go-to support system for those who have come out of abusive relationships. But when you don't have that structure or you don't have that support system, then you wind up, and I think there's a lot of people who, because of the dysfunctionality of their family situation, allowed them to justify staying in an abusive relationship because they didn't have the support to turn to, or they had a kind of a portrait of the family, and they wanted to maintain that, and they didn't want to be the one that shattered the family picture. And they took responsibility, and they felt responsible for that. And you may have experienced that yourself, that you don't want to be. But in my family, my immediate family, there are 9 marriages among 3 children. That shows a foundation which is really incredibly shaky. If you have all 3 of your children, 9 marriages, 3 children, says something. And not to look at my parents or the family dynamic as being the root cause. Certainly you reach a point where you stop saying everything is rooted in, you move past that, you take ownership of your own, and you say, okay, it was there, I choose now to reframe it, and I choose now to address it differently. But when you come, as we talked about when we opened, into this holiday season, which is so family and friend gathering focused, and you find yourself as the outsider, which is what the abuse victim finds himself as, even if they're an insider, they have the role of the outsider even from the inside. You in your marriage were an outsider, doing everything you could to protect yourself even though you were an insider. And then when you got free, you were now an outsider and searching for an identity as an outsider that was no longer an outsider living an insider's life. So it's kind
I'm joking with you.
Right. It's kind of convoluted, but it's true. And then and I don't find isolation as a non-biblical concept. God took every one of the prophets into isolation. God took Moses into 40 years of isolation and separation. He took 25 years of Joseph into separation. This was a natural refinement. This was, for many, a marination process. And my question to the Lord is, are you marinating me? Are you tenderizing me? Are you preparing me for something? Or is this just a consequence and this is going to be my new normal? And I'm always going to be the rabbi, and there's nobody that's ever going to want to realize or acknowledge that there's a man behind the rabbi that wakes up in the morning and has real feelings and has moments where they say that, hey, the phone's not ringing, the invitations aren't coming in. When they're planning this kind of, and I have a family and a couple of small group families where I'm an outside family member, but they have their family unit, and you're the uncle, you're the family uncle that comes in, but that's not your day-to-day. That's the event. You love them, and they love you, and you feel loved and a part of them, but that's not where you spend your nights and weekends.
Right, right. And again, everybody's story is unique, although there is a lot of overlap between those of us who have walked this walk. One of the things that I found to be helpful is to connect with volunteer opportunities especially during the holidays, where I would participate in feeding the homeless, or there was another one where it was providing meals for disabled veterans. And I really, I did that by myself as well as with my kids, because I thought it was important for them for us to look outside of our situation. That's not to the exclusion of our situation, but outside of ourselves, and to what other people are going through and struggling with. And I personally found that to be a real outlet for me during the holidays especially. So again, that may not be for everyone, but that really did help us for many years to do that. Also, you mentioned something, I don't know if it was on the break or when we were chatting live, but about getting involved in a beach group or something you were saying. Yeah. And I think there's wisdom in that, as well as trying things that are outside of our comfort zone, whether it's a hiking group or some, there's meetup groups all across the nation that you could just Google and look at what's going on in your area. And of course, there's going to be a certain level of discomfort because you don't know these people, they don't know you. But I believe sometimes we can really miss opportunities when we hold back. So I encourage people, try stuff you've never done, or you never thought, well, that's not me. Well, how do you know until you try?
Well, very true, very true. I think that there's a framework that we kind of step into, kind of like the shark cage, where there's a trap door at the top of it, and you get it submerged in this, and you're surrounded by water and by a protective covering, and you wait to be removed from the water before you open the door.
Right.
And you can stay down there for a long, long, long time till your skin's all shriveled, and you can see as many sharks as you want, but you're not willing to say, okay, enough is enough, and open that door and swim out yourself. You're waiting to be pulled out of it. And the only person that's going to be able to pull you out of it is you and the Lord. And you kind of find it sensory deprivation. It breeds that isolation, and you are reluctant.
Right. That's interesting. That's a really interesting example you're using. I used to say that I felt like I was underwater. And then when I started dating, and then even when I met my my sweetie, my husband now, during our dating years, and even really early on in the marriage, I would say to him, I feel like I'm underwater, meaning that sensory deprivation, I think is the phrase you use. There were parts of me that felt numb and that just still were healing. It's like you're thawing out, in a sense. And it's very normal. Again, that's a reflection of the grief. And our brains, we have to remember, not only have we been affected emotionally by an abusive relationship, spiritually, but also physiologically. Our brains have been rewired as the result of trauma. And it takes time and like the things I write about in my book, making intentional decisions to heal that brain and to rewire our thinking. So we have to remember, we've also physiologically been affected. So it's not just in our head. To a certain extent, it is in our head because of the rewiring.
Yeah, for those who have adopted the abused mindset, unlovable, unworthy, not deserving of good things, not having what other people have, and it being unobtainable. How do we help them break and shatter that mindset? I mean, it's easy to say, well, get in your car and drive to the other side of the tracks and see what it's like to live in a homeless shelter, or go look. You live in a house, go drive through the trailer parks and realize that you are better off. But that's in the natural. How do you deal with the emotional, where you might have had childhood abuse, whether or not it be emotional, you're not good enough, the rejection of family, or leaving home early and finding independence. And in independence, you found yourself in this, well, I don't need anybody kind of, I can do this myself. And on all of a sudden you wind up in the 7th decade of your life, and you look around and you're exactly right. There isn't anybody, and you wound up being where you navigated yourself to, or you attracted the wrong kind of people. Is it ever too late for anyone to reframe, rebuild, restructure, and renew, and find that way to navigate from victim to survivor to overcomer?
Absolutely not. It's not, healing is not about chronological age, it's about choice. It's something we have to pursue. It's not going to just happen. If I break my arm and I don't go to the doctor and have the doctor set it, I'm going to walk around with a broken arm. If I've got a broken heart and I don't actively pursue what is necessary to help heal that broken heart, I'm going to continue walking around with a broken heart. So I don't believe it has anything to do with age. However, at the same time, what you were describing about, how we think about ourselves, because being in an abusive relationship, even if it didn't involve physical abuse, the verbal and emotional will leave scar tissue that can last a lifetime if we don't address it. And one of the things I have found to be really helpful, and that I teach people to do, is, and depending on, if they're a believer or not. If they're a believer, I'll often look at, what does the scripture say? This is what your partner said, or this is maybe the faulty thinking you have. I wrote an article along these lines of, they said, God says. Your abusive partner said, like mine would always say, you're damaged goods. No one's ever going to want you, things like that. And so I had to for me, I wrote it down. These are the things that I still struggle believing about myself. These are the things that were said to me by my partner. What does God say? And I would read it. I would read it in the scripture. I would say it out loud. I'm a big believer in praying the word of God, literally taking the scripture, praying it out loud. Not that it's, in a sense, some sort of magical whatever, but I think there's power in the spoken word because God's word is living. So I would find verses that were the counter to the faulty thinking. And I would read them. And then the kids and I, for many years, we did what my youngest one called our gratefuls. And I write about this in the book. And we would jump on one of our beds at nighttime, and we had this list. And I actually had a list of truisms about who God says we are. And I taped it with Scotch tape on the headboard of my bed. And the kids would pile on the bed, and we would read through that. And then we'd go in a circle, and each person would say a few things they're grateful for. And my youngest called it our gratefuls. And what we all experience through that is, again, that brain rewiring. Our brain hears what we say. If I say, my life is going to be awful, I am damaged goods, no one is ever going to want me, or if I think it, I just don't put volume to it, but I think it, I don't say it out loud. Our body's going to follow what our mind thinks and believes. It's not the other way around. So getting at what that faulty thinking is, no matter where it's coming from, and saying, what is the flip truth? I call it flip thoughts with my clients. What's the flip thought? What's the flip truth? And then saying, Lord, by faith, I don't feel this. I still feel like I'm damaged, but you say, what do you say? And so just years of practice. It's like any exercise. The first time you go out and you lift weights, you're not going to have these cut muscles. But if you continue daily lifting weights, eventually you're going to start to see the results. It's the same thing mentally.
Well, you're exactly right. We just have a couple minutes left in this segment, and I want to address the issue of loving yourself. I think it is one of the most often confused concepts that if you can't love yourself, you can't love another person. And people have a hard time with that concept of loving oneself first. Help me navigate that for them so they can understand why that's so essential to the healing process.
Right. Well, I dedicate almost an entire chapter to what you're talking about, so I'll do my best to try to answer it quickly. I do believe that we can't give away what we don't have. We can only give what we have. And when we struggle loving ourselves, because when you're in an abusive context, and we know there's a plethora of reasons why people stay in those relationships. That'll be another show. But the part of what needs to take place is learning how to have a healthy love for myself. And for me, as much as a lot of believers are super familiar with the 1 Corinthians 13, even if you're not a believer and you go to a wedding, often we hear, love is patient, love is kind. And we're like, yeah, at least speaking for myself. But I went through that and I was like, okay, Lord, love is patient. How patient am I being with myself? How kind am I being? How gentle am I being? Am I being good? Am I keeping a record of my wrongs? That I struggled with that for years, blaming myself and feeling shame for the years I stayed and how it affected my kids. And identifying those areas in myself where I was not loving myself and saying, okay, Lord, what can I do today? What can I do in this moment to be kind to myself? Maybe it's take a nap. Maybe it's go for a walk. Maybe it's let yourself cry. Paying attention to where am I with loving myself and really actively working on that. And for me, it helped to work with a counselor to bounce things off of. And also journaling was really effective. And I'm not a big journaler. I'm a therapist. I'm not a big journaler. But during that season, I found it to be extremely helpful to break it down. And I used the 1 Corinthians 13, and I just used that as my, in a sense, litmus test. How am I doing with this? Where can I improve? Asking people who I could trust, do you see me growing in this area? Where am I still holding things against myself? And just working through it, whether it be with a therapist, with a best friend, journaling, talking to God. The point is that you're talking, you're staying in motion.
Well, I think it's incredibly important, and I think I want to make sure we cover this very important topic when we meet together again. Our next time together is going to be on, let me see what the calendar says, will be on the 2nd. Hold on a second. I have to make sure.
I've got us as the third Monday, every third Monday, if that's what you have.
The third Monday that's December 17th at 11 o'clock a.m. Central Time. And we will see you back here again. It's always a pleasure to see you. You always add great insight and great compassion to our conversations. And I thank you so much for being a part of our family. God bless you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.